Hi everyone. I just wanted to welcome our first speaker. Versaggi, she is the Senior Research Associate in Binghamton University's Public Archeology facility. Versaggi's research centers on the archaeological history and prehistory of the people who once lived in present-day New York State and Pennsylvania. She's active in presenting the results of archaeological research to the public and engaging communities in the interpretation of their heritage. Versaggi works with Native American groups on various consultation projects in New York. So if you would please help to welcome Nina Versaggi.
Hello, I'm a little shorter than our last speaker, but I think this microphone's pretty strong. Oh, I didn't want to knock the whole thing off. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to give a talk today about the ancient roots of the confluence. I've been asked to cover 10,000 years of the past in 20 minutes, so excuse me if I sometimes have to refer to some notes. And there's the marker here. But thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the first in-person presentation I've done in a long time since the pandemic. I want to stress that I will be talking to you about the archaeological history of the confluence, but there is an indigenous history of the confluence that I am not qualified to talk about. I can tell you, based on my conversations with indigenous people I work with all the time, that there is a history that begins with the Sky World and Sky Woman and her arriving on Turtle's back and creating an earth that's called Turtle Island, and we all live on that today and take care of the resources that are here under our own feet. But there are others who will talk to you about the indigenous history, and they're not contradictory, they're complementary. First, I'd like to place our confluence in its regional context. We have a Susquehanna River that is 444 miles long. It's pretty hard to imagine its length, but this river and the territory it runs through and all of its tributaries contribute to a very dynamic situation here up north in our small neck of the world at the confluence. People, ideas, traditions, spiritual worlds, all kinds of information and ideas are transported over these hundreds and hundreds of miles. So while we look very small in this context, we actually have a very important role in the northern reaches of the Susquehanna. And this is somewhat of a hub or a gateway through which a lot of information flows. I'm showing you a close-up. It's called a digital elevation model. It kind of removes, it's a GIS format that removes a lot of modern distractions, not all, but a lot of modern distractions, and it allows you to kind of get a feeling for what it might have looked like here thousands of years ago. One of the things we have found out through some of our excavations is that don't assume that the confluence you see today is actually the confluence that existed thousands of years ago. The confluence changed, and it may have been more to the east, I think some of our excavations suggested that it might be, but it was an unstable environment. And there's been a lot of fill that has buffered this confluence and made it more stable than it was thousands of years ago. Archaeologists talk about, and we give names to periods of time. And one of the earliest periods of time when humans were in this region is called the Paleo period. People were highly migratory, covering hundreds of miles in a year. They were hunting the migratory mammoth and mastodon and other animals that are now extinct. They did not live here at the confluence They hunted around here. We find their specialized tools, these fluted points, the paleo points. But because I think the confluence was so unstable, they were not living here. They were hunting and following herds of animals, but they were not living here. But by the Archaic period, we begin to see people settling into the valleys that in what we call New York and other states. On a seasonal basis, they moved. They moved their camps as the seasons changed. They had a warmer climate, certainly than the Paleo period, a lot more biodiversity, and they hunted, fished, either with spears or with nets, and they collected plants. Many of these resources occurred in different locations, so they didn't live in one place all the time. They moved quite often, and they met with other groups doing the same thing at certain times of the year for ceremonies and rituals. I was privileged in the 1980s, and I'm dating myself now, but I directed the excavations behind the Robertson Museum across the river. They were going to expand their parking lot, and they were intent on doing it correctly, and they had a grant, and I participated as one of the field directors and wrote the museum catalog, Hunter to Farmer. We had a large exhibition there on the findings in the backyard. We had an incredible time capsule here that covered almost 10,000 years. And Robertson found the site to be so significant, and so did the state. They made it eligible for the National Register, that they preserved the site. So we did our excavations. We decided not to excavate further, and the site was preserved. You can now have a picnic on it if you'd like, and in the backyard of Robertson. But Robertson's time capsule is told by the artifacts that are left behind. Now, we don't try to equate artifacts and objects with people, but sometimes those were our time markers, and sometimes they're the only time markers we have to examine the archaeological history of our region. There were some time periods represented that were only represented by artifacts, and others had cooking features. They had hearths and even some smoking pits. And from those pits, we were able to get radiocarbon dates that tell us that we have a time capsule that can be dated up through about 1400 AD. So where we sit today, this beautiful building, was once a parking lot. And some of our community archaeology members are here who maybe excavated a little bit on this area under the parking lot, but we were absolutely astounded, expecting to find nothing preserved under asphalt, and instead finding a really incredibly unique series of occupations here, preserved actually under asphalt. Not only did we find the beginnings of the city of Binghamton in this area, but we also found much more ancient camps and a Haudenosaunee remnants of a village site here right behind me. The historic beginnings of the city of Binghamton, you're actually sitting on those foundations. Not many people realize that in green, outlined in the floor of this building, are our findings mapped out to scale. Nobody's in a privy, so that's good. But we had a very unusual finding in our excavations. And we found a lot of cooking hearths again, and a lot of pits and other features. But this one pit feature was so large that we had never seen it before. It was about over 2 meters in one dimension. That's about 6 to 7 feet. A meter in the other direction, about 3 feet. And its depth was almost 5 feet. So, it was over my head if I was standing in the middle of it. But it was full of artifacts. And we had no idea, had never seen this before. We were not sure, what exactly it was that we had. Let's get back just a second. And one thing of extreme importance to this is the radiocarbon date. It is the oldest feature that we have found in this section of the Susquehanna Valley, predating every other site that we've looked at in this region. So this pit feature, as I mentioned, it had many, many artifacts in it. A lot of them were finished tools, but we also had thousands of pieces of the byproducts of making those stone tools. There were some net sinkers and other woodworking tools, and it really puzzled us, and so we can only speculate and tell a story about what it might be based on what things that other people have found in other regions. And we're speculating that this might have been a cache, a storage pit, made by highly mobile hunters and gatherers who may have visited this confluence for a very specific reason during a certain season of the year. But they knew that they would be coming back either the following year or during another season. Maybe they were here to fish in the spring, but knew they were going to be coming back in the winter and did not want to carry all these items with them, or they wanted to be sure that they would have a supply of tools in case they were in the region and needed them in a hurry. So we interpreted this as a cache, a storage of very important tools that would be needed during another season. Oops, I know, At the John Moore farm site, for those of you from this area, it's near the MacArthur School that you see on the bottom there, between a flood control dike and the river. And at one time they were planning a walkway, a pedestrian trail there, and they abandoned those plans and put the trail somewhere else. But we found that this time period was highly present in this particular site. It was a site that had a lot of material that is diagnostic of the transitional period. It starts around 1500 BC. It was a time of definite change. That's why we refer to it as transitional. The projectile point, the hunting tools got larger and broader. They were using different raw materials. And of major importance, there was a big innovation in cooking technology. They were using stone imported from southern regions all the way down Pennsylvania, all the way down to Georgia, this steatite or soapstone, a very soft stone, to actually carve cooking vessels. And for the first time, they were able to put a cooking vessel over an open flame. And so that revolutionized whole cooking technology. And here we have a real hub or a gateway of these materials being traded into the region. This morphs us into the woodland period. It's again a time of big change in this area. We begin to see the seasonally nomadic hunters and gatherers begin to settle into villages. The villages contained a new type of dwelling called the longhouse. And the people living in each longhouse were related through the female line. So even men who married a woman from a certain village moved to that village and lived in that family's longhouse. Women were very prominent, and I don't need to tell you because we have members of the Haudenosaunee here, but women have a very prominent role in the governance and ceremonies and decision-making in the Haudenosaunee villages. And they developed clay pots, another revolution. No longer did they have to import stone for bowls for cooking. They were able to make pots from local clays. We have a lot of these late woodland villages near the confluence. This is, again, a hub, a real concentration of villages during this time period, this early part of the woodland period. Where we're sitting right now, where the BU Downtown Center came into being, and across the street at Twin River Commons, the housing project for students. There were villages here, and they tell a chronological story and an important story about life here at the confluence. The University Center excavations produced a lot of pits, these storage pits, refuse pits, and cooking pits. There was also one wall of a longhouse that was uncovered. And for archaeologists, that means, and Tony knows as well, there are small stains in the ground where a post once stood and formed the outline of the longhouse. Those posts rotted through time, and what remains in the soil, natural progression, is a dark stain. And we were able to map what was left of that particular feature. But there were dozens of pits, and those pits contained quite a bit of pottery. And the decorations on this pottery tell us something about the people and also the method of decoration. So in these early examples, a stick with a cord wrapped around it was pressed into wet clay before the pot was fired, and it produced an image that we refer to as cord wrapped, cord impressed. Across the street at Twin River Commons, between foundations from a very intense historic development, people's side yards and backyards, there were additional traces of a slightly later village site that contained, again, many pits, storage pits. The sequence was a little afterwards, but it also produced a slightly different type of pottery. So some of the pottery from this time period was more incised, it was called. So somebody took a sharpened stick and it made lines in the wet clay, and then the pot was fired, and that produced this particular design for the time period slightly later, ending around 1500. Now, one very unusual pit feature had freshwater shell in it. And the shell is very alkaline, and usually when organic materials that usually rot in acidic soils come into contact with shell, they're well preserved. And that was the case here. A lot of animal bone was preserved, and some of that animal bone was made into tools. In particular, this piece there shows what we would call a bone awl. And an awl is used for punching into leather or fabric. But we began to think that because the pottery in the pit dated to the same time period as the incised pottery, we wondered if maybe one of those sharpened pieces of bone could have been used to decorate the line incisions on the pots. We worked very closely with the Haudenosaunee representatives for these projects, Tony Gagne and Tom Huff as well. They designed and made a sculpture to commemorate their ancestors' villages that once stood here at the confluence, and to let people know that while their ancestors are gone, their people still are here, and they continue to live their lifestyle, their ceremonies, they talk and educate the rest of us, and we learn every day from our collaborations. This sculpture, as Diane mentioned, is on the third floor. It used to stand here, but it was hit with one too many Frisbees, and so the better protected area for it was up on the third floor. You're free to also visit it. It kind of brings us full circle, because it's called The Givers of Life, and it It tells the story of Sky Woman as she came down to Turtle Island and had a child and became the mother of the first peoples. And on the back are maize, beans, and squash, the sustainers of life. Now, usually I end on this up note, but I've been asked to cover the history as well, and it will be a fast gallop because you can actually see a lot of what we found. But the contact with Europeans was fraught with many disasters, and they brought trade, which sometimes was good. They brought religion, you can debate that, and also war, culminating in the Sullivan-Clinton campaign that destroyed many villages, including one at the confluence here, referred to as Chenango with an S, and also a series of small towns from here to Chenango Forks called Otsoningo. So the area of the confluence here, the 2 blocks on the south, they were highly developed during the historic period in the 1800s. The Chenango Canal, many industries grew up here, railroads, and all other types of development began to characterize these blocks here near the confluence. Our excavations found tons and tons of material, and some of them are displayed in these the vitrines here lining the wall. So you're free to take a look at them, and I see Maria O'Donovan, the director of those excavations, sitting in the back, and she certainly could explain them a little bit more if you'd like more information on them. But here we are today at the modern confluence. It may or may not represent what it represented thousands of years ago. It has an indigenous history that is important and well worth knowing about, and it has an archeological history that makes some of our past become more visible after being hidden under asphalt and dirt and soil from years ago. Thank you very much.
Hello, Nina has graciously agreed to answer questions. If anyone from the audience has a question, Claire will get to you with our microphone. So here's your opportunity to ask Nina about thousands of years of history in this area. Anyone?
Thank you. It was so interesting. You said that you didn't expect to find anything under the cement and the foundations. How in the world did you convince anyone to fund such a project? And I'm glad you did.
I can be pretty stubborn at times, and I know that's a surprise, right, Tony? But I had a feeling, and people at the State Historic Preservation Office were constantly telling us you don't need to dig in asphalt, you don't need to dig. And I just had a gut feeling, and I said there's, not all parking lots mean that they dug down all the way. Sometimes, obviously, foundations to big buildings, they dug foundations and destroyed what was in those foundations. But if you think about the houses in Binghamton and any neighborhood, they all have side yards and backyards, and people grow food in their backyards. It just couldn't have been that everything was scraped away and destroyed. So I just persisted, and I think they just gave up because I just wasn't letting it sit, their decision sit. So they said, okay, you can do some backhoe trenching. And we did that in 1989, 1990, because there was supposed to be an urban mall here, Wilmerite Mall. And so we did some trenches, and they were 15 meters apart, and we very carefully scraped, and some of the first ones we dug were totally destroyed. And I said, oh, I'm wrong. oh, I'm never going to live this down. But then like the fourth or fifth trench, I was surprised. I said, stop, stop, stop. And I saw the chert artifacts and some dark staining to a feature. And I not only knew that we had something preserved under asphalt, but I knew that how deep we needed to go to hit that undisturbed soil. And so we were able to guide the trenching for the rest of the project. And that's how we found it. That's a great question. People do wonder about that all the time.
You mentioned that with the Roberson project, there were areas that were protected because they were significant historically. Are there areas on this property or beside us at Twin Rivers, some of the green spaces here, do any of them have any significance? Or is what we see on the ground beneath our feet here what remains for us to know?
There are green spaces that are preserving significant areas of the site. And that's one of the ways that we negotiate with developers, and the Haudenosaunee representatives were very involved in these negotiations. And so most projects need to have green space. So usually we can maneuver that in such a way that Tony can follow up on that later, but we can usually maneuver and talk with developers and have them change where their parking lots are slightly or move their building a bit. And Newman Development with the Twin River Commons was very cooperative, and we were able to have green space in certain areas that preserve parts of the site. Same with up on Upper Front Street, across from SUNY Broome, where the movie theater is. We found significant sites there, and they pushed all of their green space into one area to preserve a portion of the site. And they shortened their width of their parking spaces to accommodate that.
Have you gone down to Owego area too?
Yes.
I've heard there's like farmland that you found a lot of
We found-
parts.
There's a lot in Owego. We haven't done all of the work ourselves there, but when they built the sewer plant on the south side of the river, we were there for a whole season. There was a significant site there, as well as at the elementary school when after the flooding, when they were rebuilding the elementary school and their athletic fields, we worked there quite a bit. And Tony was there monitoring our excavations. But Owego is a real melting pot type area. There are a lot of artifacts that suggest southern groups were coming in and being welcomed by the Haudenosaunee to establish small villages in those areas.
Thank you so much for telling us about the research here. I was wondering if you could, because I'm now very curious about the green blocks that we're sitting on. Could you enumerate a little bit more, help us unpack? You said that the floor that we're sitting on has spaces to kind of correspond to what research you did. So could you please give us a map of what we're sitting on?
Well, we happen to have Maria O'Donovan back there. Everything that's green on this floor represents the absolute, with all the little glitches in measurement of every piece of stone stacked foundation that we found in this area. I joked about privies, but there are privies against the wall, the small squares. Maria, these are some of the outbuildings, I believe, and
yeah, it's the rear yard of Gather Buffalo, and also including the rear wall of the house. Okay. We have a cistern over here, and people right here are sitting in a drainage feature and everything. Yes, I am. And then you have back against those walls a couple of carriage houses, portions of them, and of course privies, yeah. And there's a two-seater over there that I think some people are sitting in. It's the larger square.
now we were,
The rear yard of the Gather Buffalo property.
the designers of this building were actually really, really cool people, and we didn't realize it, that they expressed an interest in everything we were doing, and they wanted to see our maps. And before we knew it, it was like, you reproduced the foundations. We could have squared these off a little bit, but they took our AutoCAD maps and actually, they just wanted to make something different in the lobby. And so that's what this is. And the reddish concentric circles is like a wave heading toward the river. The commemoration, the indigenous commemoration is the sculpture that's on the 3rd floor. It's definitely worth a visit to take a look. I try to visit her every time I'm in this building.
Okay, one more question?
I just wanted to know if there are maps or signage. For instance, around here, I know you have the displays here, but are there signage to tell us the meaning, the importance, the significance of what you've just described, of the green lines and the privy, and some of the other areas that you discussed in town, where an area has been preserved because of the archaeological discovery? Is there signage at these sites so that people walking by can kind of know and be educated about where they're standing?
But for this building itself, if you go to the beginning of the exhibition here, there is a map, right, Maria? There's a map that with a number key to the floor patterns. There are walking tours that we have conducted as part of First Fridays, and we're trying for some more digital exposure to these. If you go to our public archaeology facility website, there's a page with projects, and there's hot links that you can click on and get a summary of the report. Every time we touch the ground, we write a report, and that report is illustrated with photographs and drawings. So if you're really interested in delving deeper, you can go. I don't remember if it's PAF/Binghamton or binghamton.edu/PAF. It's one of those two nomikers to find the page with projects. We had plans and hoped for grants that didn't come about larger regional signage, but we don't give up, and even though I'm retired, semi-retired, the plans are still out there.